Joan of Arc, the girl who spoke for God. She was just a peasant girl from a village no one cared to know. She couldn't read, couldn't write, and had never seen a sword in her life. And yet, she claimed God had sent her to save France. By the time she was 19, she had turned the tide of a war, led an army into victory, and was burned at the stake by the very men she had helped. This is not a story of myths or legends. This is the true story of Joan of Arc, the girl who claimed to speak for God. Joan was born in the village of Domremy in the year 1412, during one of the darkest chapters in France's history, the 100 Years' War. England and France were locked in a brutal, generations-long conflict, and France was losing. Her parents were simple peasants, hard-working, devout Catholics. Joan was raised in a home of quiet faith and long days of farm work. She was no princess, no prodigy. She spun wool, she tended sheep. But from the age of 13, she began to hear voices. Not in the way madmen do, but clear, firm, and divine. She claimed that Saint Michael, Saint Catherine, and Saint Margaret spoke to her. They told her that she, a peasant girl, had been chosen by God to save France, that she must go to the Dauphin, the uncrowned heir to the French throne, and lead his armies. She resisted, she prayed, she wept, but the voices never stopped. By the time she was 16, she couldn't ignore the voices anymore. She left her village and made her way to Vaucouleurs, a nearby stronghold loyal to the Dauphin. There, she begged to be taken to the royal court. At first, they laughed. A teenage girl, in armor, sent by God? But she was persistent, unshakable. Even the commander, Robert de Baudricourt, was eventually swayed, not by her words, but by her unbreakable will. In March of 1429, Joan was brought before Charles VII, the Dauphin. He disguised himself among his nobles to test her. But Joan walked straight to him. She knew who he was. The voices had told her. And then, she told him the unthinkable. That God had chosen her to lead his army and reclaim his kingdom. Charles was desperate. France was collapsing. The English held vast territory, and the key city of Orléans was under siege. He gave her troops, a sword, a banner, and she marched into history. At just 17, Joan of Arc led her first military campaign. She didn't wield a weapon. She didn't command strategy, but her faith, her presence, was electric. She rode in white armor, her banner bearing the name of Jesus, and wherever she went, men followed, hearts ignited, fear vanished. At Orléans, the tide turned. Against all odds, Joan inspired a desperate army to victory. The siege was broken. France had hope again. One victory followed another. And on July 17, 1429, Joan stood beside Charles as he was crowned King of France in Rheims Cathedral, just as the voices had foretold. She had fulfilled her mission. But her war was far from over. With her divine mission seemingly complete, the court no longer needed her. Politics returned. Joan, who once stood beside kings, was now seen as a threat, an outsider, a symbol of chaos. In May of 1430, during a skirmish near Compiègne, she was captured by the Burgundians, allies of the English. She was sold for 10,000 livres, not rescued, not ransomed, forgotten. The English wanted to destroy her, not just the body, but the soul. She was put on trial for heresy. The charges were absurd. Wearing men's clothing, speaking to saints, acting without church approval. But her worst crime? Believing God had spoken to her. She was interrogated for months, alone, chained, denied legal counsel, and yet she never recanted. On May 30th, 1431, Joan of Arc, at just 19 years old, was tied to a stake in the market square of Rouen, her hands bound, her body wrapped in wood. She asked for a cross. A soldier gave her one. As the flames rose, she cried out only one name: Jesus. 25 years later, the church would re-examine her trial and declare her innocent. In 1920, nearly 5 centuries after her death, Joan of Arc was canonized as a saint. Today, she remains one of the most enduring symbols of faith, courage, and the power of conviction. She didn't fight for power, land, or legacy. She fought because she believed, because the voice of God had told her to. In a time of kings, warlords, and tyrants, it was a teenage girl from a village no one remembered who became a voice the world could never forget.